Picture this. You're the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You've spent an entire year insisting your economic strategy is brilliant. And then a bombshell report drops right after Christmas, essentially saying your flagship budget is the reason Britain's economy is in the toilet. That's not just a bad day at the office. That's a career-defining disaster. Welcome back to UK Political Insights, where we break down the political carnage so you don't have to. Today, we're talking about how Rachel Reeves' Annus Horribilis just got its grand finale, courtesy of a major report that's basically pinned Britain's economic slump directly on her disastrous November budget. Growth forecasts are down, we're sliding in global rankings, and unemployment's rising. But hey, at least inflation's sort of coming down, right? Let's get stuck into this absolute mess. So, the Center for Economics and Business Research just dropped their World Economic League table for 2026, and it is absolutely brutal for Rachel Reeves. The report directly blames her November tax raid for Britain's subpar economic performance over the next 5 years. Not Brexit, not COVID hangover, not global uncertainty. Her budget. The one she crafted, the one she defended, the one she insisted would set Britain on a path to prosperity. That budget is now officially being held responsible for why our growth forecasts are terrible. That's not spin from political opponents. That's an independent economic research organization saying in plain terms that her policy choices have damaged Britain's economic prospects. The CEBR says that over the next 5 years, Britain's annual GDP growth rate is set to remain subpar at an average of just 1.5%. That's pathetic by any historical standard. It's barely enough to keep pace with population growth, which means in practical terms, most people aren't getting any better off. We're essentially treading water while other countries are actually swimming forward. And the report is crystal clear about why this is happening. The government's set of policy announcements at the autumn 2025 budget did little to support the near-term growth outlook. Translation, Rachel Reeves made things worse, not better. But it gets even more embarrassing when you look at the GDP per capita rankings, because this is where Keir really set himself up for humiliation. He specifically said he wanted to be judged on this metric. He trumpeted it as the way to measure whether his promise that working people would have more money in their pockets was being delivered. So, naturally, Britain is now predicted to plunge below Finland and Belgium in the global rankings. We're set to slump to 22nd place by 2030. 22nd. That's not a major economic power. That's barely scraping into the top quarter of developed nations. And remember, Starmer chose this as his preferred measure of success. He literally asked to be graded on this exact thing, and we're failing by that standard. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride absolutely nailed the mood when he said this has undoubtedly been Rachel Reeves' Annus Horribilis and urged her to change course in 2026. It's not too late, he said, to put the country before your own political survival. That's diplomatic language for you've had an absolutely catastrophic year, and if you had any sense, you'd admit it and do something different. And let's be honest, calling 2025 Reeves' Annus Horribilis might actually be underselling it. This hasn't just been a bad year. It's been a comprehensive disaster from start to finish. The CEBR's assessment is just relentlessly grim when you read through it. They note that Labour was elected on a platform to boost growth and has achieved only very limited success. That's the kind of damning with faint praise that's actually more devastating than outright criticism. Very limited success means you basically failed, but they're being polite about it. The report goes on to highlight all the specific problems. High inflation averaging 3.4% over 2025, driven by rising energy and food prices. Unemployment being fueled by the employer's national insurance hike, and an overall growth outlook that falls far short of historical trends. That national insurance increase is particularly worth dwelling on because it perfectly encapsulates Labour's economic illiteracy. They needed to raise revenue. Fine, that's understandable. But they chose to do it by making it more expensive for businesses to employ people. What did they think was going to happen? Businesses aren't charities. When you increase the cost of employment, businesses employ fewer people. It's not complicated. And lo and behold, unemployment has risen and job vacancies have collapsed. The jobs website at Zuna reported that 2025 was one of the toughest years for job seekers since the pandemic, with vacancies shrinking for 5 months running and a 6.4% month-over-month slide in November alone. This is a direct consequence of making it more expensive to hire people. The really infuriating part is that this was all predictable. Before the budget, business leaders, economists, think tanks, basically everyone who understood how the economy actually worked, warned that hiking employers' national insurance would damage employment and growth. And the government just ignored them all, convinced they knew better. Now we're seeing exactly what was predicted coming to pass, and the government's response is basically to shrug and say they're doing their best. It's not good enough. When you ignore expert advice, implement policies that clearly won't work, and then act surprised when they don't work, that's not just bad luck or difficult circumstances, that's incompetence. Let's talk about what this means in practical terms for ordinary people, because that's what actually matters. The Office for National Statistics data reveals that Britons have literally got poorer this year. Wealth on a per-head basis dipped to zero growth. Real household disposable income per head fell 0.9% in the first quarter and 0.8% in the third quarter, giving a nearly 1.7% drop overall. That means after accounting for inflation, the average person has less money to spend on their actual life than they did at the start of the year. They're poorer. Working people do not have more money in their pockets as Starmer promised. They have less. That's not a statistical quirk or an accounting anomaly. That's people's lived reality getting worse under this government. The Treasury's response to all of this is genuinely laughable. They put out a statement saying they defied forecasts this year because various organizations upgraded their growth forecasts. But here's the thing, when your forecasts were absolutely terrible to begin with, getting upgraded to just mediocre isn't exactly cause for celebration. It's like failing a test, getting to retake it, and being proud because you got a D instead of an F. You're still failing. The fact that you're failing slightly less dramatically than initially predicted doesn't change the fundamental reality that you're not succeeding. The Treasury also pointed to protecting record investment in infrastructure and backing planning reforms, airport expansions, and nuclear power stations, all of which are fine things to do, but they don't address the immediate problem that growth is terrible, people are getting poor, and unemployment's rising. Long-term infrastructure projects are great, but they don't help the family struggling to pay bills right now because one of the parents lost their job because their employer couldn't afford the increased national insurance contributions. You can't eat a planning reform or heat your house with a future airport expansion. Reform UK's Richard Tice came out swinging, saying Labour are taking the British people on a festive ride of horror. Jobs collapsing, growth disappearing, confidence plunging. It's harsh language, but is it inaccurate? The Confederation of British Industry reported that private sector output was on track to fall in the fourth quarter of 2025, with declining activity across all sectors. Business leaders warned that companies put the brakes on investment and hiring even before the autumn budget because they were worried about what was coming. And they were right to be worried, because what came was a tax raid that made things even worse. The budget did little to brighten bosses' moods, said the CBI. That's another one of those polite ways of saying it was absolutely disastrous. When business confidence collapses, investment dries up, hiring stops, and the economy stagnates. That's basic economic cause and effect. And yet, this government seems genuinely surprised that businesses responded to increased costs and regulatory uncertainty by becoming more cautious. It's like being surprised that people use umbrellas when it rains. Of course that's what they're going to do. Matt Swanell from the EY Item Club pointed out that real household income growth is slowing sharply, and although the household savings ratio decreased in the third quarter, it remains high by historical standards. What that means in practice is that people are still nervous about the future, so even though they're spending a bit more, they're keeping more savings than usual as a cushion. That's not consumer confidence, that's consumer anxiety. People don't feel secure enough to spend normally because they're worried about what's coming next. And given the government's track record, they're probably right to be worried. The Bank of England said last week it expected growth to flatline in the final 3 months of 2025, which is about as damning an assessment as you can get. Flatline means zero growth. The economy is going nowhere. And this is happening while other countries are growing, while emerging economies are surging ahead, while our competitors are making gains. Britain is standing still while everyone else moves forward, which means in relative terms, we're falling behind. That has real consequences for living standards, job opportunities, public services, everything that matters to people's daily lives. Now, the CEBR report does note that Britain is expected to overtake Japan to become the world's 5th largest economy and close the gap on Germany. That sounds impressive until you remember that Japan has been in economic stagnation for decades and has a declining population. Overtaking them is hardly a massive achievement, and closing the gap on Germany doesn't mean much if we're still behind them and our growth rate is slower, meaning the gap will start widening again. These are the kind of statistics politicians seize on to claim success while ignoring the broader picture that's much less flattering. The full effects of this budget haven't even been felt yet. That's what's genuinely terrifying about this situation. The national insurance increases only kicked in recently. Businesses are still adjusting. Some are absorbing the cost for now, but planning redundancies later. Others are freezing hiring or canceling expansion plans. The damage is still unfolding in real time, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. We're potentially looking at more job losses, more businesses struggling, more investment decisions being delayed or canceled, and more people finding their living standards squeezed. Nina Scarrow from the CEBR pointed out that Donald Trump's tariff blitz had a major impact on the global economy this year,